Ready?
May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Cornell. Here. Trustee Listener.
Here.
Trustee Miller.
Here.
Trustee Mulvaney.
Here.
Trustee Thomas.
Here.
Trustee Vree.
Here.
Okay. Our first order of business is the approval of the minutes of August 24th, 2017, our Committee of the Whole, and our Village Board regular meeting. Are there any questions on those or subjects to discuss? If not, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Second?
Roll call, please.
Trustee Cornell.
Yes.
Trustee Listener.
Yes.
Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney.
Yes.
Trustee Thomas.
Yes.
Trustee Vree.
Yes.
All right, we're at that point in the meeting where if there's anyone from the public that wishes to address the meeting on a subject that is not on the agenda, this would be the time. Is there anyone? Okay, if not, the Committee of the Whole meeting this evening looked at really two things. The first was a discussion of the various projects that were covered by our bond issue that we initiated in 2015 and their current status, and the possibility of remaining projects that would be done under those bond issues that will be considered as part of the capital projects for the coming fiscal year. And so that was we had a little discussion. The staff gave us an introduction to things that they hope to bring to the board to look at in more detail as we consider next year's budget. The other item before the Committee of the Whole was looking at a variety of design concepts that are under consideration for possible application to the changes to Tudor Court, and to go over those in this early stage and to get feedback in terms of things to look at and continue to develop. And those were the two subjects covered by the Committee of the Whole. Trustee Vree, could you tell us what went on at our Finance Committee meeting this morning?
Yes. Had our meeting this morning, discussed several things. The two regular topics, the monthly financial report. Things continue to look good. Revenues are coming in slightly ahead of plan for the year, primarily due to building permits. Building permits continue to be strong in the village, and that reflects a good economy and the village being in good shape. And then on the expenses side, we're also a little bit ahead. Salaries have been a little bit, or actually salaries were as expected, just total personnel costs were a little bit light. So far so good on village finances. The other was the community improvement plan schedule. It's something that we now talk about every month. Just reviewed how the schedule, what's still on tap and how things are going. Everything is going according to plan. And then the main part of the meeting was about our long-range planning. Every year, the village or the finance committee likes to spend a lot of time on the long-range planning because we think there is so much uncertainty with the state of Illinois. And so we talked about areas where we might see pressure on village revenues, from property tax freezes to telecommunications tax potentially going away, worst case scenario, cable tax revenue potentially falling. So there are a lot of things that we talked about and how to plan for those things, as well as where we would potentially have some control over expenses and how we can manage that. And so this was our first discussion about some of those topics. That was it.
Thank you. Trustee Miller, could you tell us, have there been any further meetings of the Plan Commission?
No, we did not have a plan commission meeting. We will be meeting next week. I think that's Wednesday, the 27th.
Correct.
All right. Yes. So that will be our next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Thomas, tell us about the Golf Advisory Committee.
We did meet. It was actually a lot of good news in the meeting. The weather in August was almost ideal for golf. It was cooler than average, which in the summer helps, and only one day had rainfall that affected play. So the result was we had budgeted rounds were exceeded by 959 players. It was the second best round count in the last 11 years. And year to date, the course is 1,200 rounds over budget. So that's very encouraging. The course is being used, and the revenue is coming in. We also discussed some of the improvements that continue to be done. For example, over time we have been eliminating sort of macadam pathways away from tee boxes and so forth, or to tee boxes, and putting in sort of crushed stone. And so some of that is going forward on additional holes. For those who have ever played the course, there's an area between the 8th hole and the 9th hole where, in effect, carts wound up near the front of the tee box, which is sort of inconvenient for people who may tee off in the back tees. So actually there's going to be more of a roundabout and an area going back towards the back end of the tee box where the carts would go, which will improve the way that functions. We also discussed a little bit what I would loosely call tree trimming, which is over time, a lot of the older golf courses have trees, for example, they've got branches and so forth that now are going into the fairway, in effect. And we're not removing the trees, but there is some trimming that needs to be done, because on the general philosophy that if your ball lands in the fairway, you shouldn't have a clear shot to the green blocked by a tree branch that's overhanging it now. That never used to do that 25 years ago. Finally, there was an event for the Illinois Junior Golf Association played on the course with 130 juniors between the ages of 14 and 18. So we continue to have use of the course by various groups such as that, and I think that's all good for the future. And that's it.
Thank you. Alrighty. Trustee Mulvaney, tell me, where are we these days on the Sustainability Task Force?
Well, I'd like to stick with the golf theme. We met on the 22nd as a Sustainability Committee. Our next meeting is of August, and our next meeting is on the 26th of September. So I think I reported out to this meeting on the 24th of August, but I still want to say thank you again to Stella and remind folks what a great job she's doing instilling sustainability. And we're still thinking about how we can leverage those ideas. And Dale, we haven't shared this round, but we were thinking maybe we got free rounds for some of our sustainability players, as like incentives to get them, to keep them moving.
No card.
They'll be walking.
Right.
They'll be walking. I'd also, though, just like to take the chance to remind us as a board some of the things that we're working on. There will be action on the active transportation plan. We'll begin dialogue in earnest with the Schools and Park District about the safe routes to school component of the active transportation plan. So that's kicking off in October. We've continued to do some outreach with our community, our downtown business communities. We've prepared and drafted a letter to our sister governance agencies regarding opportunities to collaborate and envision on a common sustainability theme across the library and park district, etc. And we're continuing to make progress on our Ravine initiative, which is really a North Shore first, where this Ravine Alliance of homeowners, I mentioned this in the last meeting, but it's pretty unique, and that is progressing. They've had several meetings to advance the science of managing a ravine within a populated edge. That's our update. We're meeting on the 26th. A lot of this progress wouldn't happen without Adam. Where is he? I can't see. Yep, Adam is here. So thanks also to Adam and staff time for helping us move these initiatives. I think they're important. Some of these initiatives are nearing completion or at least mature enough where they're going to be somewhat self-sustaining. And so we're beginning to think about what's next, other projects that we can initiate. We really don't want to be the long-term maintainer of these projects. We want to initiate and get them going and off the ground. And if they're good ideas, they should find their own money and resources to implement. So we're open to ideas. Of course, all the public is welcome to come and join and have a good time with the sustainability team on the 26th. Thank you.
Thank you. On the subject of sustainability and things that are going on, I did want to mention that this past Saturday, Gail Listener and I had the opportunity to have Lynn and Cam Avery take and show us the work that they've been doing for the last 2 years on the Green Bay Trail and the progress they've made on getting rid of invasive species and planting natural plants to replace them, and their work on their butterfly sanctuary and pieces there. And it was very impressive. Gail and I enjoyed it a great deal, and it was very informative. And so I thank Lynn and Cam, as did Gail, on our behalf as a board for all of their hard work. And while I'm on the subject of things that Gail has been doing, I want to remember to ask this time, gee, tell us what's going on the Sesquicentennial Planning Group.
Well, actually, and this time I don't have anything to report because we actually didn't meet this month and we are meeting next week, so I will definitely be able to update you then.
Terrific. Thank you. Do I have a village manager's report?
You do. Thank you, Mr. President. Just a few things I wanted to make note of. First and foremost, recently there have been some news stories outlining the shutdown of a significant community raffle in downstate Morris, Illinois, which brought to light a change in state law that impacts how raffles are licensed throughout the state of Illinois. Prior to 2015, licenses were issued by the state. However, during 2015, state law changed, and while it's possible we were contacted by the state when this change took place, we don't have a record of any sort of communication from them, so I'm guessing we never officially heard about it. But with that change in the state law, raffle licensing is now a county or municipal responsibility. Cook County apparently is only issuing licenses for unincorporated county areas, so this option of having a raffle licensing system is up to individual municipalities in the county. Our current ordinances don't allow the village to issue raffle licenses, and given the change in state law, it now appears that raffles cannot legally be held in the village without a change to our ordinances. There are several raffles held in the community annually, one that the Chamber of Commerce, for instance, hosts in the summertime. And we've had a few recent inquiries in the last weeks from other organizations that are doing private raffles who have been seeking a license. Generally, a number of our neighboring communities do have raffle licensing procedures in place, and putting one in place in Glencoe would be simple and easy to administer. We don't see this as an activity that would be troublesome given the history of raffles being held in the community. So we are recommending that staff develop an ordinance with Holland and Knight, bring that back for the board's consideration in October so that we can allow these raffles to take place in the community. We certainly have more information if anyone has any questions, but this is one of those where it's actually, I think, a pretty straightforward process that we could put in place without really any major impact to the staff. So that's our recommendation, that we bring something back to you in October. Hearing no opposition to that, we will we'll include that on the October Village Board meeting agenda. Just a quick update. Obviously, President Levin already mentioned that at tonight's Committee of the Whole, the Village Board had an opportunity to provide initial feedback on a spectrum of programmatic features that have been developed for consideration as we look to improve Tudor Court. For the benefit of those watching at home, as a reminder, this project was recommended by the Plan Commission as a place-making effort on Tudor Court as an outgrowth of the downtown plan. Since the board approved a contract for the design review exercise with Tesca Associates in June, our consultants and staff have been working with a stakeholder focus groups of individuals who represent various parties, including Tudor Court businesses, Writers Theater, the Chamber of Commerce, the Women's Library Club, the Park District, and a resident of Glencoe Drive, all to consider how we might improve the corridor. Tonight's presentation at the Committee of the Whole was intended to gather additional feedback in the process. We do have some next steps that are intended to elicit additional community input, and we're planning to do an open house at a date still to be determined later this fall to gather some public feedback on as the design review process continues. Using the feedback gathered from the focus group, tonight's meeting with the board, and public feedback, we expect that recommended design alternatives will be presented back to the village board sometime early this winter, and we'll be able to take a look at the outcome of all of that input. Finally, quickly, the efforts are fully underway on our transition to garbage collection services with Lakeshore Recycling Systems set to begin November 1st. Last week, an online registration tool was made available to allow residents to elect the level of service they found most appropriate for their household. This week, a copy of this, basically the same information that's provided in that electronic format, is being mailed to every home in Glencoe. We ask that residents either return the card that's included in this mailing, there's a perforated card on the second page, or use the online tool or contact LRS directly via phone before October 16th to ensure that LRS has the appropriate information as service transitions November 1st. Great deal of information, including regularly updated frequently asked questions, is available on the village's website. And also until Saturday, October 14th, which is the last Saturday of the French Market this year, Village and LRS staff will be present each Saturday at the French Market to help residents elect service and answer questions. There were a number of folks that stopped by on Saturday to talk to Adam and representatives from LRS, and so we want to make sure that that's available to people as they have questions. We're working very hard to make the transition seamless, but we do need residents' help in gathering this information. If you do have questions, you can contact LRS directly, 773-685-8811. That information's all on our website. One other note, on the commercial side, for any interested parties in the downtown or commercial districts that are interested in working together on joint contracts for service with a commercial provider, since the village is no longer going to be collecting garbage in our commercial districts, the Chamber of Commerce is actually hosting an informational meeting this coming Tuesday, September 26th at noon in the Hammond Room at the library. This is an opportunity for businesses to work with neighboring businesses to jointly contract for garbage collection services. I'm grateful for the Chamber for facilitating this discussion. It's a neat opportunity. Adam's going to be present at that meeting to help answer questions of the business community, and we will certainly help in any way we can to facilitate those discussions. And with that, that's my report for this evening, unless there are questions. Yep.
Quick question, is that survey you mentioned available by cell phone?
It is. The link is on the website, and it can be filled out on a mobile device.
Okay, as you know, we have one appointment to the Village Sustainability Task Force that's on our agenda tonight, of an outstanding resident who moved here from the Netherlands, and I hope she will forgive me for how I pronounce her name. It's Elsebeth Schwimmelpenninck van der Ooijer.
Is it? That's pretty good. Now you got to spell it.
Right, I can spell it, but we don't have much time. It'll take another hour to do that. But with all hopes that Elsa Bay forgives me. If there are no questions, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
May I have a voice vote? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, she is appointed. The other thing that we have this evening, we're very pleased to have Fred Spicer here from the Botanic Gardens to give us an update. He's the Executive Vice President and the Director. And it's delightful to have you here to tell us a little bit about how we're doing on the current status of things, Fred.
Thank you, President Levin. And to you and all of the trustees, good evening. It's really a great opportunity, and the garden appreciates the opportunity to come before the board and give you this brief update on the Chris Jarontowski campus. Before I go into my slides, I thought it might be a little helpful to tell you a little bit about me. And as many of you probably know, I succeeded Chris Jarontowski as the garden's Executive Vice President and Director upon Chris's retirement in February. I know Chris came before this body a number of times to update you on the garden's activities. And my journey to the Chicago Botanic Garden from New Jersey, where I grew up and went to college, most recently took a 15-year detour through Birmingham, Alabama, where I was Executive Director and then CEO of the Botanical Garden there. Prior to that, with my degree in landscape architecture from Rutgers University, I worked in the design-build business for 15 years before I moved into public horticulture, and I worked in the public sector in Morris County, New Jersey, and ran their horticulture component. Had oversight of over about 650 acres. And as Chris was one of my earliest friends in public horticulture, it's quite an honor to be the steward of so much that he built, and quite fitting that I get to oversee the construction of the campus that has his name on it. So to begin with, let's go to the overall site plan. I guess forward is, oh, there we go. Oh, you have? You have? Oh, okay, good, good. So in this plan, north is to the left, so the garden's border with the Glencoe Golf Course is at the top of the page. At far left is the Plant Conservation Science Building. At far right are the existing horticulture buildings. So the area outlined in red is the nursery, which we completed in 2016. Next slide. Phase 1, which features the new head house, which is to the left of that highlighted square, and the first phase of the greenhouse range to the right on that square. That's the part that's under construction right now. And I'm happy to say that we're on schedule and on budget to complete this project, this phase of this project, by the end of the year. Next, please. Phase 2 will be the completion of the greenhouse range, and that's scheduled for all of 2018. We hope to begin, if the weather's mild, through the winter, but our big milestone date is May 1st, and we hope to start bringing up the actual greenhouses. Next. The shade evaluation garden, which lays out in front of the whole new building complex, is scheduled for 2019 and into 2020. And we're pretty confident that we have funding for all of these phases in place. So next, at the same time, we'll also do some remodeling of the existing horticulture buildings and finish some work on the roadway, kind of paint our way out of the room, if you will. So sometime mid-2020, late 2020, we expect full completion of that project. Next slide. Here's a bit of a different look from a drone that we flew on Saturday. The nursery is at the upper left, again completed in 2016. Phase 1, next, is the part that's under construction now. And then next. And then phase 2, which will start again in 2018. So the last little piece of phase 1 that we'll do right at the end of the year is we'll build a little temporary corridor between the phase 1 greenhouses and the existing greenhouses, which you see right there, those 3 white buildings on the right. And we'll move all the plants out of the existing greenhouses and into the new greenhouses. And we'll do that hopefully as quickly as we can, so we can begin demolition of the old greenhouses. Now, some of you probably know that that greenhouse that just has one angled side, it's the 3rd white building from the left, that was one of the first buildings erected at the Chicago Botanic Garden in 1974, 1975. The 2 other greenhouses were donated to us a couple of years after that, and they were 20 years old when we got them donated to us. So we're really upgrading the technology in all of these facilities incredibly. We've skipped about 8 changes in technology in the time it's taken us to rebuild these. Let me go quickly through some progress shots. Next. Oh, there's the shade evaluation garden, and that's the area in front again. So next slide. And you can see in that slide the area that's highlighted is again the shade evaluation garden. And it's a pretty extensive footprint that'll have. That'll give us the ability to continue our plant evaluation program that we've had going for a number of decades. Next. So a few progress shots, and we'll go through these quickly. That was when the head house greenhouse project started going. You're looking at early shots of the head house, and then recently. So things are moving right along. Next, we're going to walk right up to that sort of that front door and stand at the entrance to the head house. Next. That was back when it was under construction. And next. So now we're looking into the new head house, and you're standing in the corridor that separates the left-hand side of the building, which is the dirty side, from the right-hand side, which is the clean office side of things. So if you pan a little bit to the left, next slide, you can see this is the area where the potting activities will go, the potting benches, the shelves will receive the potting benches. The area beyond that is our loading dock. Behind the wall to the right are where all the coolers will go, the walk-in coolers, the growing chambers, things of that nature. Lots of storage happening back on the right-hand side. If I go to the clean side, next slide, this is the open office area that's in there, and you can see the sheetrock is finished, the paint's going on. We'll probably complete this building, not all the greenhouses, but sometime in October. And I think we're scheduled to have an open house in that building for members on the 7th or the 8th of November, so we better be complete. One of the cool things that the features of this head house building, I don't know if you can see the 3 circular elements on the ceiling. They look like round, and they're sheathed kind of because they're doing the sheetrock here, but those are solar tubes. They're like high-tech skylights. They have reflective material inside. They have lenses. So those aren't light fixtures. This was a pretty cloudy day when I took this photograph. Those are actually bringing in natural light to the inside of the building. That's one of the more, I guess, sustainable features of this structure. Next. Okay, so there now we're looking in the opposite direction, looking south. That was, again, when we were underway last year. Next. And that, believe it or not, is the same slide, same area just last month. And you're looking down that central corridor, and if you think about the greenhouse and the head house and the nursery, this is really a manufacturing and shipping facility, right? So that central tunnel is our main shipping corridor. Plants will move in and out of the greenhouses at 90-degree angles. They can go back up and down, back into the potting area in the head house, and then out into the nursery, and from there on to the gardens, etc. Next. So we're just looking into one of the orchid houses, and I don't know how much all of you know about greenhouse technology. Probably don't need me to lecture you on that, but just suffice it to say that from the 15th century in Korea, where people first started growing plants in glass houses where they manipulated heat, a lot has happened since then. So if any of the board would like a personal tour to see some of that technology, I'd be more than happy to show it to you. And just one more view, next slide. Finishing up, looking out at the garden. So does anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
I had one question, which was there's a slide many back which showed the sort of the shaded pathway, and it appeared to go over part of the pond there. Is that right?
Let's see if we can find the slide.
The red line seemed to include part of the pond there.
Oh, you mean just going over out into the prairie area?
Well, I'm just talking about right over here.
Yeah, it'll come up to the edge of the water, the shoreline.
But it's not you're not gonna fill in.
No, we as you know, we can't.
Okay. Well,
No, I'm sorry, that's just a little graphic license there, kind of showing a little bit of the footprint. Thank you for the question. Yes.
Why do you call it a head house, and where do you get your water from?
A head house is an old term that really just means I guess it comes from the fact that it usually sits at the head of a range of greenhouses. So it contains things like the power plant to operate all the mechanical systems, and it includes water access. So the water is coming from potable water supply. Right now, we don't have a connection, as I think you know, to the Glencoe water supply. All our water comes from the Highland Park side. I think we still have long-term plans to connect up to Glencoe at some point, but I don't know where those plans stand today.
At the golf course, they take raw water from the line heading out west, and untreated, I believe, untreated. I don't know if that's an option, untreated for you, or better or worse for your process.
Well, for many of our plants, we'll need to use potable water. And certainly we have emergency systems in there like eye wash and showers and other facilities that will need potable water for. For a number of the plants, we actually will use water treated through a reverse osmosis process. We'll be using very, very fine aperture misting and fogging heads, and we'll need to remove all of the minerals out of those. And for a lot of the orchids and other crops that we'll be growing, they really will react very negatively to that. But I think the board knows that for all of our irrigation, we pull all of our irrigation water out of our lakes. And with the remediation that we did this year for the zebra mussel problems, we had to retrofit all of our irrigation pumps. So hopefully you won't have mussels in any of your water lines.
So you have on-site treatment for that?
On-site treatment? No, we water with the lake, irrigate with the lake.
On-site, no treatment?
No treatment. Any other questions? Thanks very much.
Fred, thank you very much. All right, our next village board meeting will be October the 19th. And with that, we've reached the consent agenda. I should mention with respect to the consent agenda, which is item 6, that item D on the consent agenda has been removed because there are certain aspects of it that are still being worked out. So that'll come back to us in October. And so the consent agenda does not include item D. Are there any questions on the consent agenda? If not, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Second?
May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Cornell.
Yes.
Trustee Listener.
Yes.
Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney.
Yes.
Trustee Thomas.
Yes.
Trustee Vree.
Yes.
Okay, our next item of business is consideration of a resolution authorizing the village manager to execute a professional services agreement for an active transportation plan for the village of Glencoe with the Active Transportation Alliance of Chicago, Illinois. And as I understand it, Adam Hull is going to start us off on that. Adam?
Thank you, President Levin and members of the board. At the August Committee of the Whole meeting, staff presented the Sustainability Task Force's recommendation to enter into an agreement for a biking and walking planning study to be completed by the Active Transportation Alliance. Based in Chicago, the Active Transportation Alliance is a nonprofit advocacy and transportation planning organization comprised of senior transportation planners that work to improve the conditions for bicycling, walking, and transit. This firm has completed technical assistance for 8 suburban Cook County local governments, including the villages of Bensonville, Oak Park, Kenilworth, and Melrose Park. Task Force members presented the proposed biking and walking study to the Glencoe Park District Board of Commissioners and School District 35 Board of Education. Presentations were well received, and a pledge of funding support from the Park District in the amount of $5,000 and the School District in the amount of $6,900 was made. In order to reduce the overall cost of the study, the village refined the proposed scope of the project, decreasing the use of Active Transportation Alliance staff, and expanding participation from the Plan Steering Committee comprised of Glencoe residents, and extending the overall project timeline. The biking and walking study provides a detailed and resident prioritized action plan for potential improvements to biking, walking, and transit in the village of Glencoe. Such recommended improvements could include the following: infrastructure improvements to sidewalk networks, path and trail extensions to tie us into the extensive regional trail network, and overall recommended improvements to provide for safe travel for Glencoe children to and from parks and schools. Such infrastructure recommendations would be included in the village's community improvement plan and would provide similarly styled data that residents may have seen in the water distribution and production studies. At this time, I'd like to introduce Ron Burke, Executive Director of the Active Transportation Alliance, to provide a brief overview of the proposed biking and walking plan for the village of Glencoe.
Good evening.
Good
Can you hear me okay? Yes? All right. It's great to be here. We have some slides ready, correct? Would you mind going to the next one? So I just wanted to mention real quickly that I am pinch hitting tonight for Heather Shady, who's our senior transportation planner. It's probably worth telling you just a little bit about myself before I go on. I'm not sure if I can top the bio that you heard earlier from our friend with the Botanic Gardens, but I'll try. So I've been the executive director now for about 7 years. Prior to that, I was with the Union of Concerned Scientists, working on energy and environmental policy. And then before that, I was deputy director with the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. So my background is actually mostly in environmental policy, but I've really enjoyed working on transportation planning and policy the last 7 years. At Active Transportation Alliance, it's something near and dear to my heart. I know that communities that are friendly for biking, walking, and public transportation tend to also be economically vibrant, healthier, more environmentally friendly places to live. And so it really connects back to my environmental background strongly, and I appreciate that. So let me tell you a little bit about the organization. We used to be called the Chicagoland Bicycle Federation. Some of you may remember that name better than the Active Transportation Alliance, which doesn't quite roll off the tongue. And it isn't quite as easy to remember. But the mission was expanded 9 years ago to include walking and transit as well. We recognize that it's not just about biking, that communities that really support alternative transportation modes really get things done. And so this is our mission, promoting better biking, walking, and public transit to create healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities. We have around 25 full-time staff. We work throughout the Chicago area, including the suburbs. We've worked in more than 100 suburbs. You heard some of the more recent work we've done, but we've been in well over 100 suburbs working on bike plans and safe routes to school plans, bike rack siting, complete streets policies, and things like that. Next, please. So we have this overall goal, right, to really create a region where there's half total traffic crashes in the region are cut in half compared to 2005, and where half of all trips are made by walking, biking, and transit. Right now, we're well short of meeting either of those goals, but we're working towards it. I should mention that we have more than 7,000 members throughout the Chicago region who support our work and who help us get out and really interact with public officials like yourselves in the city of Chicago as well as the suburbs. Next, please. So here, yeah, these are just some samples of our work. Closer to Glencoe, we've done some really interesting work in Skokie recently. We did the Northwest Municipal Conference bike plan a few years ago. We worked in Wheeling, Highland Park. We helped them design a family-friendly bikeways plan, creating low-stress bike routes where everybody feels comfortable riding, and that's one of our top goals when it comes to biking. We recognize that not everyone is a confident cyclist like me. The average person is not comfortable riding in traffic, and we need to design our facilities to help make that a lower-stress situation so that anybody from a young child to a senior citizen can feel comfortable riding a bike, and that's often not the case, right, in most of our communities. So our bike plans are really designed to help communities achieve that goal as well as making it safer for walking. Next slide, please. So this is describes our approach. It's really all about connecting with community, getting their input, and taking those recommendations and those sentiments from the community and really reflecting those in the biking and walking plan that we're going to prepare for you. Next slide. So this just shows this process in a little more detail. We talked about the steering committee, which normally will consist of residents who have a special interest or expertise, staff from the village, other officials, park district and so forth, helping us to look at the existing conditions to get a handle on how are things working today when it comes to better and safer walking and biking in Glencoe, helping us figure out the best way to engage the broader public to get their input, creating the draft plan, and developing a final plan. So the steering committee is going to play a really integral role all through that process, but our staff will actually create the deliverables and draft forms for the steering committee to review and help us finalize at the end of the process. Next, please. So I mentioned the steering committee, roughly 6 meetings. All of these steps will be crucial. At some point we'll probably get into not just generalities, but looking at specific types of improvements. And, we can, depending on how the process goes, there may be more or less time to do that. There's a lot of crosswalks and a lot of intersections and a lot of streets in Glencoe, right? So you may not be able to get into every single one, but chances are we're going to hear from the community, hey, this is a real problem spot. And we'll kind of hear some themes like, wow, if only we could get from here to there, that would be really important. And we'll try to reflect those sentiments from the public in the planning process. Next, please. So again, a big part of this process is first identifying the existing conditions. Our staff have done this, as I mentioned, in many, many suburbs as well as in the city of Chicago. You need to know where things stand today to really figure out how best to improve upon those conditions. So we'll be looking at crash data, existing street network, traffic volumes in terms of cars. We often don't have good counts for walking and biking, unfortunately, but we generally do have traffic counts for automobiles. So we'll often go out and do field work to get a better handle on how many people are walking and biking and where and what's that look like. Next slide, please. I mentioned the community engagement. We're envisioning an online survey and map. These tend to be very popular in places where we've done them before. Public workshops. You'll tend to get a more engaged crowd. You probably know this. At your public workshops, you get a broader audience that'll do the online survey, and the folks who are able to make it to the public workshops will often have a lot more information to share, and that's important. And that will help us start this process of prioritizing what needs to happen, what the priorities are for improving things here in Glencoe. Next, please. So we'll come up with these recommendations based on input from the steering committee as well as the broader public, and our assessment of how things are working today, existing conditions, and really tapping into our expertise around what's working in other places. One of the nice things about hiring Active Trans is that we have so much experience in suburbs. A lot of your private for-profit planning firms don't have that. And one of the reasons we're able to be here and work in a lot of suburbs, to be quite honest with you, is that we are a not-for-profit. We have other sources of revenue. And we want to work with communities like yours, and we're not necessarily going to charge you what, frankly, the private engineering firms will, because we're in this for the mission, not really to make money. And so we're able to provide a service at a pretty discounted rate, and we're actually committed to working with you beyond the finalization of the plan to help you find the funding to implement some of the recommendations that come out of that plan. Next, please. So that's just real quickly a summary of what we're planning to do here in Glencoe. I ran through it pretty quickly, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
So the interactive online
Yeah.
stuff, when does that go up? How do we know about it? How long is it?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's laid out in the proposal. I don't know off the top of my head what step that is exactly. Like, if Heather was here, she could probably tell you, and I apologize. It's going to be certainly after the steering committee comes together and starts to provide some input on how, and also the steering committee will provide some input on the survey itself. As I recall, we're envisioning, I think it's about an 18-month process? Maybe you can weigh on this. Yeah. Go right ahead.
It's going to be an 18-month process. Steering committee will be formed comprising of 10 members in the community. We've already received some interest from residents. Steering committee meetings will take approximately an hour and a half, and we've already broken those out into subsections of what they will comprise of. So for example, we'll have a kickoff meeting, and then the second and third meeting will focus on parks and schools and access. As part of the development of the survey, I'm sure you'll receive outreach from the village and from the school district, park district, as they have a larger email base. So we'll definitely utilize their bases to reach out to residents and reach out to people that the parents and that are affected by this plan, so we can get some input from them as well too. I'm sure it'll be well in advance of the survey going live.
Those will be public meetings?
Yes, there'll be public meetings.
I did have another question for you. Where do you get your funding?
Great question. Have you heard of Bike to Drive?
Yes.
Yeah, that's our event. A lot of people don't know that. It's actually our event. MB is our corporate sponsor, so thus it's MB Bike to Drive. But it is our largest fundraising event. We also have grants from foundations. I mentioned we have roughly 7,000 members, dues-paying members, as well as some major donors who go beyond your typical $35, $50 donation. Folks who really appreciate the work we do to create healthier, more vibrant cities through better biking, walking, and public transportation. We also have contracts. So we essentially run what amounts to a consulting firm kind of embedded within this not-for-profit that does this type of work. It's a way for us to really get out and work in communities where, frankly, our small staff couldn't do it otherwise. We have about a $3 million annual budget, which is great, but you can only get to so many suburbs, for example, on that budget when you have all this other work we're doing as well. A lot of our work is more policy-oriented. A good example of that, and a good example of how biking and walking has become more popular and is really bringing people together, is a press event I was at recently with Mayor Emanuel and Ken Griffin. Two people that come from different political backgrounds, but have a shared passion for cycling. And you may have already heard the story, but we've been working really hard for years to persuade the Chicago Park District to create separate trails on the lakefront. One trail for people on bikes, one trail for people on foot. If you've ever been on the lakefront trail, you know how crowded it gets, especially on the weekends in the summer. So we've been working, trying to persuade the Park District and the Mayor's office to get on board with this. That eventually happened. Ken Griffin loves to bike on the lakefront trail, and even though he and the Mayor don't see eye to eye on some things, they saw eye to eye on this, and Mr. Griffin wrote a check for $12 million to help pay for the changes on the trail. So my point is, that's the kind of work we also do. We always do so in a very partnership-oriented way. We work very closely with the City of Chicago because we know that partnering with them is a far more effective way to achieve our mission. Partnering with the Village of Glencoe, the Village of Brookfield, so on and so forth, has turned out to be a winning strategy for us, and we look forward to kind of playing that out here in Glencoe as well.
How does public transportation fit in with your mission?
Sure.
I get the walking, biking.
Yeah. So, people who ride public transportation, on average, tend to walk at least a mile or two a day. People don't think about it. And there's a lot of folks that drive to a park and ride. That's true. But the average transit rider walks, or bikes for that matter, at least a mile or two a day. So we think of public transportation as active transportation as well, because most of the time you're walking on some end of that trip, right? And also you're probably less likely to own a car or to own 2 or 3 cars if you're able to use public transportation, which means you're also going to be walking and biking more. So we're big fans of public transportation. We're also advocates for transportation equity, meaning we want people who are lower income to be able to get around as well. And sometimes owning a car is just not affordable. So we really need to create cities and regions where folks can get around in a reasonable amount of time, right? Without a car. So that's one of our goals as well. Yeah. Any other questions? Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very briefly, given the additional financial support from the Glencoe governances, the Sustainability Task Force is recommending that the village enter into professional services agreement with the Active Transportation Alliance to complete a biking and walking plan in Glencoe. The overall cost of the biking and walking plan is $20,300. The cost of the study will be shared with the Glencoe Park District and School District 35, and the village's portion of that cost amounts to $8,400 within the budget allocation issued to the Sustainability Task Force in the fiscal 18 budget.
Any further questions on the matter? If not, may I have a motion to approve?
Second?
Roll call, please.
Trustee Cornell?
Yes.
Trustee Listener?
Yes.
Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney? Trustee Thomas? Trustee Vree?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your coming, Mr. Burke. All right, does anyone have any other business to come before us? Pete?
Yes, I'd like to say one thing. Thank you to Chief Lewandowski for two things. Our block had a block party, and they showed up with their fire truck. They also handed out little public messages about the locked cars, lock your car. Very effective. The block party was thrilled to have the fire engine, and the little handouts generated a good bit of discussion amongst the adults. The other thing is we passed our dispatch work, whenever that was, a year ago, and I had the unfortunate need to call 911 at my house, and it was really fantastic. I had no idea necessarily where the dispatcher was. It made no difference. They were very professional. They coached me through the process, talked me through it, and by the time we hung up after 5 minutes or so on the phone, I could hear the ambulance en route. They came to our house, took care of business. It was really fantastic, and I have people. Some of you may know I'm a little bit of a softie, but it really brought like tears in my eyes. Just the whole process and how professional they were in serving our community. It was wonderful. So thank you for that, and pass it on to the men who came.
I'd like to note that he's not that much of a softie. Living on the same block as him at the block party, when we were looking at the fire engine last year, he pushed me out of the way.
Duly noted.
Thank you. The record reflects.
I think we've survived
I'll
this
note that he
comment.
fell over.
All right, if there's no further business to come before the meeting, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Second?
Roll call, please.
Trustee Cornell?
Yes.
Trustee Listener?
Yes.
Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney?
Yes.
Trustee Thomas? Trustee Vree?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.